Hey everyone, Darcy Scott here, and today we're going to do another review of a fantastic album. We're going to be taking a look at In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. Now this came out in 1969, it's seen by many as kind of the progressive rock album. If you're going to talk about one prog rock album, it's going to be this one. And I can see why. It's a great album. I've heard it many times before, listened to it many times recently for this review, and it's just so ahead of its time. So we're going to delve in and talk about it. But first, so again, it comes out in 1969. It's the first big prog album. There's some groups doing progressive rock a little earlier. You have Soft Machine, you have Procol Harum, but this is kind of the defining album that kind of starts to solidify this as a genre. You have other groups that become prog rocker at this time. You have Yes, they have their debut out. You have Pink Floyd, they have 3 or so albums out. Genesis, I believe, has an album out, but they're still doing kind of art rock, psych rock. They're not trading in their signature sounds yet. They're not owing their debt to King Crimson and everything they did yet, but they will. They will. But it's just a great album. And to give you some perspective, I've got the top albums of that year from 1969. It's a great year in music. I don't know if you knew this. You have the Beatles with Abbey Road, Led Zeppelin 1 and 2, Frank Zappa's Hot Rats came out, the Stooges self-titled album, the Stooges comes out, Velvet Underground, same thing, their self-titled album comes out. So 69, you have a lot of experimentation going on. You have a lot of new sounds coming out. With all that in mind, however, this album still sounds years and miles ahead of these contemporaries. As great as each and every one of these albums are, Led Zeppelin 1, I'm not a big fan of, to be honest. Same with Velvet Underground, I think they're a little overrated. But in terms of music history, these are all very important albums. This album still stands out as being well ahead. And you can hear that even just in the title track. Let's get into it. So before we'll do that, we'll talk about each person on the band. So you have Fripp, Lake, McDonald, and Giles. Probably the most famous for most people would be Greg Lake, who goes on to form Emerson, Lake, and Palmer the next year. Right, so title track, you have 21st Century Schizoid Man. This is kind of the defining track for the album. Even people that don't know progressive rock, they know this song, right? It's a title that perfectly captures the mood of the song. It's claustrophobic, it's angry, it's almost punk in attitude, which makes sense. You have the Stooges coming out at the same time, and we're kind of coming into the punk era. But it's gnarly. It's I would say maybe heavier than Black Sabbath's debut. It's a bold statement, but possibly it's angry. They're angry at someone. Is it society? Is it, the ineffable man? Something. It's something, but they're angry. Very profound, and just musically, the band is firing on all cylinders. It's chaotic, but organized. It's just so much, and it just kind of sums up just this whole album. It sums up the picture. I believe that's the Schizoid Man right there. It's just amazing. And then we get into track 2, I Talk to the Wind, which is almost maybe an apology, or just like, oh, sorry for all that loud noise. Here's a gentle, kind of folky, neoclassical song, as it were. It's overall very quiet. It's mostly flute and organ kind of playing a very gentle melody. But it serves a very important purpose on the album to prove that this is a very diverse band. We're coming off of a super heavy track. It's heavy even by today's standards. It's quite noisy, quite chaotic. Going to something very gentle. Is this the same band? Yes, it's the same band. They're just that wonderful. They're that amazing. They can do that. Track 3 is Epitaph, which is lyrically quite depressing. In fact, all these songs are depressing in one way. Track 1, 21st Century Schizoid Man, is more angry. It's anger. Track 2, I would say, is more pessimistic. There's a line, I talk to the wind, but the wind doesn't hear. I might be making that up, but that's the gist of the song. Is I talk to the wind, and my words get carried away, and the wind can't listen. Track 3 is about, well, it's about your epitaph, right? So it's the depression of death, because he's trying to escape it, but he can't quite. In fact, I wrote down the last verse. It's a very powerful verse. Confusion will be my epitaph as I crawl a cracked and broken path. If we make it, we can all sit back and laugh. But I fear tomorrow I'll be crying, and then it repeats throughout until the song ends. Again, it's very hopeless, pessimistic song. Musically, it's very symphonic. It's very big, not bombastic, but full. Kind of, it again shows a third part of the band that you didn't get from track 1 or 2. It's kind of showcasing the lyrics. It's not a simple song, but the music's kind of over here, so you can pay attention to the words, which is good because lyrically, I think it's the strongest on the album. Nothing is weak lyrically on the album. It's a great album, but for sure this track is good, right? Track 4, Moonchild, which is seen as one of the more controversial tracks. Not that it's bad. It's the longest track. It's over 12 minutes. Does it have to be? No. I mean, yes and no. Okay, so we'll get into it. So the main part of the track, the main child with the melody and most of the lyrics, it was done within the first few minutes. It's a great song. It's kind of, I don't think this is a concept album in nature. I mean, it might be a concept album. I don't think it's a concept album. But if it was, you go through your anger, your depression, writing your epitaph to sinking, not to rock bottom, but sinking to a level where you've kind of gone, okay, I feel terrible, so let's find another way to feel. I feel as bad as I can feel. Let's figure something else out. And that's kind of lyrically what this does. It's kind of a fantasy-ish story about a moon child waiting for the sun kid and all that. So you do that, you get into the improvised bit, which is maybe a little long. It's not terrible, especially how it leads into the last track, track 5. That's fantastic, the lead in. But generally, when bands do improvisation, or I guess anyone, musicians or actors or whoever does improv, it's about building off ideas, giving and taking and sharing, and doing something that they couldn't do on their own. You don't really get that feeling here. It's more just experimentation. Kind of feels like they left it running, and they had to keep going. Like, oh, I guess we keep playing. You do something, and I'll try. They're not sharing a common theme. They're not building off of any melodies or anything. It's kind of a flat improvisation for the most part. There's a few minutes here and there where it kind of goes up and down and up and down. But then what happens, like I mentioned, we get this really good transition into the last track, In the Court of the Crimson King. Great song. I think it's just as good as the 21st Century Schizoid Man, but it's not as talked about now as that. Less people have heard of it, less people have heard it. They start and they go, oh, this is a great song. Maybe they get to Moonchild and they stop because they don't like the longer improv. Who knows? But that's what people do. It's not as talked about. It was even in a movie soundtrack. Not a great movie, but that's fine. It's a little more diverse than Schizoid Man. It's got more sections. Again, it's got a little bit of a symphonic flair. Lyrically, it's more fantasy-oriented. We're talking about kind of gatekeepers and dungeons and things like that. It's got some heavy bits. It's got soft bits. Kind of goes all over the place, which is good. Because, again, this whole album is showing just how diverse a band this is. They're going to go... If you know anything about the band, they're going to go a million different places with their music. They're going to have a rotating cast of musicians come in and out for the most part. But really, every aspect that King Crimson will ever get to is kind of covered in this album. So that's it, 5 tracks. Themes of sadness, again, really come through in this last track. And I guess, in a way, that's the whole album is about something. Tip from me to you. It's about sadness. It's a hopeless album, but I mean, it's a strong album. It's really, really good. I can't praise it enough, except for maybe the improv in Moonchild. I don't know about that. They even did some reissues where I think they cut a minute or 2 off of that, so that should tell you something. Speaking of editions of the album, the one I listened to, I had this album on CD years ago, but the one I've been listening to for this review over there is from, it's a used copy from The best I could find online is between 1970 and 74, so let's call it 72. Why not? Gatefold, da da da. The sound on it is really good. There's nothing, no muddied versions of it. Cover looks great. Gatefold with the lyrics is fun. It's a great addition. But again, couldn't find the exact one that I have. So on Discogs, I just went with the closest approximation. Who knows? But that's it for this review, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope I've inspired you to check out the band. Something like that. Check out this album. You can't go wrong. Until next time, catch you later. Stay well.